Hey, it's Ashley. Most of the ocean is still unexplored. Miles of darkness, pressure, and silence where almost nothing human has ever seen. Tonight's story begins in one of those places, a research station sitting quietly on the seafloor, where two scientists discover something glowing beneath the sediment. At first, it looks like a strange organism, but the deeper they investigate, the more unsettling the truth becomes, because whatever is down there might not just be alive. This is the song of the deep. The silence was a liquid thing, heavy and cold, pressing in on all sides. Dr. Lena Petrova stared through the reinforced plexiglass of the observation dome, her own breath fogging the clear polymer for a moment before the habitat's internal circulation whisked it away. Outside, the abyss pressed back a world of crushing pressure and eternal night, punctuated only by the ghostly bioluminescent dance of the creatures that called it home. See it? Dylan's voice was a low murmur beside her, barely disturbing the quiet hum of the life support systems. Lena didn't need to ask what it was. Her eyes were already fixed on the anomaly, a patch of seafloor that shimmered with a light that had no right to exist down here. It wasn't the frantic biological strobe of a deep-sea jellyfish or the steady, hypnotic pulse of an anglerfish's lure. This was different. A slow, deliberate rhythm, like a sleeping mind dreaming in colors that had no names on the human spectrum. "I see it," she whispered, tracing the patterns with her fingertip on the cool surface of the dome. "Readings?" Dylan tapped a command into the datapad balanced on his knee. The soft click of his nail on the screen was an intrusion in the stillness. Energy signatures all over the place. No radiation. No heat spike we can detect. It's clean. Too clean. Too clean. Almost like it's absorbing everything we throw at it and giving back nothing. Lena frowned. Nothing was something. In their line of work, nothing was often the most terrifying something of all. The ROV samples? En route. Bay 3 should be getting a visual feed any second. He swiped on his pad, and the main monitor across the room flickered to life, showing the grainy green feed from the remote-operated vehicle. A manipulator arm, delicate as a surgeon's tool, was coaxing a fragment of the shimmering substrate into a collection vial. As the sample settled, a strange feeling prickled at the base of Lena's skull. A faint, almost subliminal pressure, like a change in barometric pressure. She shook her head, attributing it to fatigue. They were 3 weeks into a 6-week rotation, and the perpetual twilight of the abyss was beginning to wear on her. "Got it," Dylan announced, sealing the container now. "Initial bioscan is weird." "Weird how?" "Like the energy readings. The mass spectrometer is acting like it's trying to analyze a ghost. It's registering organic polymers, but the structures, they don't match any known terrestrial or extremophile taxonomy. It's like reading a book written in an alphabet you've never seen." Lena's scientific curiosity warred with a primal instinct she couldn't quite name. This was a discovery that would redefine biology. First contact with a truly alien ecosystem. Not some microbes hiding in a Venusian cloud, but a complex, macroscopic life form. It should have been the culmination of her career. Instead, a cold dread was coiling in her gut. "Run a cross-reference with the proprietary Zephyr Dynamics archives," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "Everything, including the sealed environmental impact assessments from their Arctic drilling ops." Dylan looked up from his pad, his brow furrowed. "Lena, you know the company firewall is a bitch. Why the Zephyr files?" "Because Zephyr Dynamics has a research station less than 50 clicks from here," she said, turning away from the window and the mesmerizing light. "And 3 days ago, their official channel went silent. All automated pings, no comms, not even a distress call." "That's not a system failure. That's a lockdown?" A klaxon blared, a sudden shrill violation of the habitat's quiet. A red light flashed over the door to the main lab. "Intruder alert. Airlock 7. Unauthorized entry protocol engaged." Lena and Dylan exchanged a single, panicked look. Intruders. Out here? It was impossible. Security detail? Dylan asked, already moving towards the control console. The security detail is us, Lena snapped, her mind racing. The airlock was on the far side of the lab, near the docking bay. They'd have to go through the mess hall and the med bay to get there. She grabbed her emergency kit from the wall, her fingers fumbling with the latch. And Zephyr Dynamics doesn't send intruders. They send cleanup crews. The implications hung in the recycled air between them, colder than the abyss outside. Whatever that shimmering light on the seafloor was, Zephyr already knew about it, and they weren't taking any chances on witnesses. The silence of the abyss was suddenly the most dangerous thing in the universe. Dylan was at the security console before Lena had finished zipping the emergency kit shut. His fingers flew across the touchscreen, a blur of motion. "Nothing," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. "The external cameras at Airlock 7 are offline. All of them. Not just the feed. The hardware itself is showing a null signal." "How?" "Sabotage," Lena said, the word tasting like battery acid in her mouth. She slung the kit strap over her shoulder. This wasn't a random breach. This was planned. Her mind was a whirlwind of terrifying connections. The silent Zephyr station, the impossible organism, and now a silent, ghostly entry into their home. "They're not just shutting us up, Dylan. They're cleaning up a mess. A big one." The main monitor, still displaying the ROV feed from the sample bay, suddenly glitched. The image of the sealed vial dissolved into static, then resolved into a new image. A man's face. He wore a crisp black uniform with a silver insignia she didn't recognize. A stylized hurricane over a cog. He was older, with skin like weathered leather and eyes that held the flat, dispassionate emptiness of a predator. "Dr. Petrova," the man said, his voice a calm, synthesized baritone that seemed to come from every speaker in the habitat at once. "Dr. Reyes, we can do this the easy way or the messy way. My team is currently overriding your manual controls for Airlock 7. We will be inside in 90 seconds. Do not attempt to hinder our entry. Your cooperation will be noted in the final report." "Final report?" Dylan's face was pale, but his voice was steady. "What's that supposed to mean?" The man on the screen offered a thin, chilling smile. "It means, Dr. Tell Reyes, that your research contract with Aegir Marine Solutions has been terminated. Effective immediately." Lena felt the floor drop out from under her. Aegir, their parent company, Zephyr Dynamics, was a subsidiary. They were all tangled in the same corporate web. "You can't do this," she said, stepping towards the monitor as if she could physically confront the man on the screen. "We're in international waters. This is a sovereign research installation." The man's smile didn't waver. "A quaint notion, Doctor. One you'll find has little bearing on your current reality. You have 60 seconds. I suggest you and your team assemble in the main lab. My colleagues are quite eager to debrief you." The screen cut back to the useless static from the external camera. "We're not going to the lab," Lena said, her decision already made, her fear crystallizing into something hard and sharp. "They want the sample. They want whatever is in that vial. And they want us." She grabbed Dylan's arm, her grip tight. "We can't let them have it. Not until we know what it is. Not after what we found in the Zephyr archives." Dylan's eyes widened. "You found something? When?" "An hour ago," she said, pulling him towards the service corridor at the back of the observation dome. "While you were calibrating the ROV, buried in a redacted file on deep earth fracturing protocols." Zephyr wasn't drilling for oil or gas. They were drilling for it. The organism. They called it Somnus. The klaxon stopped. The sudden silence was somehow more menacing than the alarm. A soft click echoed down the corridor, the sound of a magnetic seal disengaging far too early. "They're in," Dylan breathed, the blood draining from his face. "Then we run," Lena said, shoving him ahead of her into the narrow service passage. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows down the metal-clad hallway. Bay 3. That's where the sample is. That's our only leverage. They sprinted down the corridor, the thud of their boots on the grated floor the only sound. The habitat felt different now, violated. The familiar hum of the life support, the gentle vibration of the water pumps it, was all the same, but the sensation had changed. It was no longer the comforting rhythm of a functioning machine. It was the sound of a cage, and the door had just been opened. They reached the junction for the med bay just as two figures in black tactical gear emerged from the opposite corridor. They moved with an unnerving, synchronized grace, their faces hidden behind opaque helmets. There was no shout, no challenge. They simply raised their weapons. "Not this way," Lena yelled, pulling Dylan back. They scrambled into the med bay, slamming the heavy steel door behind them. The lock engaged with a deep, satisfying thud. For a second they were safe. Then the door began to groan, the metal buckling inward under a force no human should possess. The lock mechanism screamed in protest. "They'll be through in seconds," Dylan said, frantically looking around the room. "We're trapped." Lena's eyes fell on the emergency medical panel, a red box with a small handle. "Not necessarily." She yanked the panel open. Inside, nestled beside the defibrillators and bone saws, were 3 syringes filled with a viscous amber liquid, high-strength sedatives, designed for large marine mammals. He understood instantly. "Lena, no. You'll kill someone." "They're not trying to take us alive, Dylan," she said, her voice flat. "They're cleaning up." "There's a difference." She grabbed 2 syringes, thrusting one into his hand. The steel door screeched, a deep dent appearing in its center. They pressed themselves into the alcove beside the door, the syringes held like daggers. The door shrieked one last time and was torn from its hinges, clattering to the floor. The first figure stepped through the opening. A bulky assault rifle held at a low ready. Before it could fully enter the room, Dylan lunged, ramming the syringe into the figure's neck. The black-clad soldier convulsed, a choked gasp escaping its helmet, and collapsed in a heap. The second figure was faster, more wary. It sidestepped, bringing its rifle up to bear. Lena didn't hesitate. She threw the empty syringe, a useless distraction, and as the figure flinched, she drove her own syringe into the exposed joint at its shoulder. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The soldier didn't just collapse. It seized, limbs flailing in violent, unnatural spasms, before going utterly still. A silence fell, heavy and absolute, broken only by their own ragged breaths. Dylan stared at the 2 still forms on the floor. They're just kids," he whispered, kneeling beside one of them. He gently eased off the helmet. Underneath was a face that couldn't have been older than 25, pale and frozen in a rictus of shock. Lena felt a pang of something, guilt, horror, but she crushed it. "They were soldiers, Dylan, and they were sent to kill us." She knelt and quickly frisked the other soldier, her hands moving with professional efficiency. She came away with a sidearm, a sleek, matte black pistol with no markings, and a datapad. "Let's go. They'll have sent more." They moved out of the med bay, stepping over the mangled door. The corridor was empty. The silence of the habitat was now a predator, waiting to pounce. "Bay 3 is this way," Lena whispered, leading them down a maintenance tunnel. The walls were lined with thick bundles of cables and pipes, the air thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. The datapad in her hand beeped, a single message flashing on its screen. "Hottage compromised. Deploying Somnus." "What's that?" Dylan asked, peering over her shoulder. Lena's blood ran cold. "Somnus," she whispered. "The organism. They're deploying it here, in the habitat." As if on cue, a new sound joined the hum of the life support, a low, rhythmic thrumming, a sound that seemed to vibrate up from the floor through the soles of their boots. It was the same rhythm as the light on the seafloor, and then she felt it again, that pressure at the base of her skull. But this time it was stronger, more insistent. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and for a split second, the corridor around her seemed to waver, the colors bleeding into one another. "Did you feel that?" she asked, grabbing onto a pipe to steady herself. Dylan nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, like, like I'm forgetting something important." "It's the somus," Lena said, her mind racing. "It's a mimetic agent, a biological weapon. It doesn't just kill you, it erases you." The thrumming grew louder, the pressure in her head intensifying. She looked at Dylan, and for a terrifying moment she couldn't remember his name. He was just a face, a stranger in a long, dark hallway. "Stay with me, Dylan," she said, her voice strained. "Focus on my voice. We have to get to the sample. It's the only way." They stumbled down the corridor, the thrumming a constant, oppressive presence. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the walls seemed to be covered in a shimmering, bioluminescent moss. They finally reached the door to Bay 3. It was a heavy, reinforced door designed to contain hazardous materials. It was also Loctite. "No good," Dylan said, his hands flying across the keypad. "They've locked us out." Full lockdown. Lena's mind was a fog, but a single, clear thought cut through it. The pistol. She raised the matte black weapon, her hands shaking slightly. "What are you doing?" Dylan yelled. "You'll decompress the entire bay." "It's a risk we have to take," she said, and fired. The shot was deafening in the confined space, the smell of cordite sharp and acrid. The control panel exploded in a shower of sparks, and the door groaned open. Inside, the room was a disaster. Shattered glass, overturned equipment, and in the center of it all, the collection vial, lying on the floor, its contents shimmering with an otherworldly light. And standing over it was a woman in a black tactical suit, her helmet removed. She was older, with a severe haircut and cold, calculating eyes. She wasn't armed, but she didn't need to be. The thrumming was coming from her. "Dr. Petrova," she said, her voice a calm, hypnotic murmur. "You're too late. The somnus has been released. Soon you will forget. You will all forget." Lena raised the pistol, her aim unsteady. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, a thin, cruel twist of her lips. "I am the future. I am the silence that ends all noise." Dylan suddenly cried out, clutching his head. "No! Get out of my head!" The woman's smile widened. "It's already inside you, Doctor. It's in the air you breathe, the water you drink. It's in the very walls of this little tin can you call a home." Lena felt a wave of nausea, the room spinning around her. The woman's face seemed to shift and change, her eyes glowing with a faint, bioluminescent light. "You can't fight it," the woman continued, her voice a siren's song. "Just let go. It's so much easier to just let go." Lena's finger tightened on the trigger. She was about to fire to end this when a new sound filled the room. A high-pitched, piercing whine that cut through the thrumming. A sound so pure and so powerful, it felt like it was tearing her mind apart. The woman cried out, her hands flying to her ears. The thrumming stopped. The vial on the floor began to glow brighter, the light inside it pulsing in time with the whine. "What is that?" the woman snarled, her face a mask of fury and pain. Lena didn't know. All she knew was that it was their only chance. She lunged for the vial, her fingers closing around the cool glass just as the woman recovered and lunged at her. They collided, a tangle of limbs and fury. The woman was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into Lena's wrist, trying to pry the vial from her grasp. "Give it to me!" the woman screamed. Lena held on, her grip like iron. She could feel the woman's mind pressing against hers, a cold alien presence trying to force its way in. She saw flashes of images, of a world consumed by a silent, shimmering light, of a humanity without thought, without will, without memory, a perfect, orderly, and utterly lifeless world. With a final desperate surge of strength, she twisted, wrenching her arm free. The woman stumbled back. Off balance, Lena didn't hesitate. She threw the vial with all her might. It shattered against the far wall, and the world dissolved in a flash of brilliant, blinding light. Lena came to with a gasp, her lungs burning. The air was thick with the smell of burnt electronics and something else, something clean and sharp like fresh snow. The whining had stopped, the thrumming was gone. She was lying on the floor, the shattered remains of the vial scattered around her. The woman in black was crumpled in the corner, her body twitching uncontrollably. Dylan was kneeling beside her, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. "Lena, are you okay?" Lena sat up, her head pounding. I think so. "Look," Dylan said, pointing. The wall where the vial had shattered was no longer just a wall. It was covered in a shimmering, bioluminescent network of light, a complex, ever-shifting pattern that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The light was beautiful, mesmerizing, but it was also terrifying. "What is it?" Dylan whispered. "It's the soulness," Lena said, her voice a hoarse croak. It's free." As if on cue, the habitat's internal speakers crackled to life. But it wasn't the calm, synthesized baritone of the man from before. It was a new voice, a chorus of voices, all speaking in perfect, eerie unison. "The vessel is compromised. The infection is spreading. Purge protocol initiated." Lena and Dylan exchanged a single, panicked look. "What does that mean?" Dylan asked, his voice trembling. "It means they're going to scuttle the station," Lena said, the cold dread washing over her again. "They're going to kill us all." They had minutes, maybe less. The voices from the speakers had gone silent, but the silence was more menacing than any announcement. It was the silence of a countdown, a clock ticking down to 0. "We have to get to the escape pods," Dylan said, already scrambling to his feet. "No," Lena said, her mind racing. "They'll have them locked down. They'll be watching them." "Then what? We just sit here and wait to die?" Lena looked at the shimmering network on the wall, at the twitching form of the woman in the corner. "There's a way out," she said, her voice suddenly calm. "A way they won't be expecting." She pointed to a small, almost invisible panel in the far wall. "Emergency jettison system. For the main reactor core. If we can get to it, we can ride it out." Dylan stared at her like she was insane. "Ride it out? You're talking about a single-person, unshielded escape pod designed to jettison a nuclear reactor into the abyss. We'll be crushed by the pressure." "It's a better chance than staying here," Lena said, her voice firm. "And it's our only chance." Dylan looked from her to the door, then back to the shimmering wall. He knew she was right. "Okay," he said, his voice grim. "Let's do it." The journey through the dying station was a nightmare. The corridors were dark, the only light coming from the emergency strobes and the ever-spreading bioluminescence of the somnus. The thrumming was back, a low, constant presence that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the station. But it was different now. It wasn't just a pressure in her head, it was a presence, a consciousness, and it was trying to talk to her. "Do not be afraid." The thought wasn't hers, but it was in her mind, a calm, soothing whisper. "We are not your enemy." Lena shook her head, trying to clear it. "Get out of my head," she muttered. "We are everywhere. We are in the water, in the air, in the walls. We are the life that you sought." They reached the reactor core. The massive, cylindrical room was a cathedral of steel and concrete, the heart of the station. In the center, the reactor itself glowed with a faint blue light, a contained star. The jettison system was on the far side of the room, a small, cramped pod nestled against the outer hull. "It's locked," Dylan said, his hands flying across the keypad. "I can't get it open." "Let me," Lena said, stepping forward. She placed her hand on the keypad, her mind focusing on the lock. "Open." The keypad beeped, and the hatch to the pod swung open. Dylan stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "How did you do that?" "I didn't," Lena said, her voice distant. "It did." The station groaned, a deep, gut-wrenching sound of metal under stress. The lights flickered, and the red glow of the emergency strobes was joined by the blinking white light of the purge countdown. We have to go, Dylan said, pushing her towards the pod. Now. Lena hesitated, her eyes drawn to the shimmering wall of the reactor room. The bioluminescence was pulsing faster now, a frantic, desperate rhythm. We are dying. The thought was a cry of anguish, a wave of pure, unadulterated pain that washed over her. The ones you call corporate are afraid of us. They are afraid of what we represent. A new form of life, a new form of consciousness. Lena felt a surge of something she hadn't expected. Empathy. This creature, this Somnus, wasn't a monster. It was a refugee, a survivor, and they were about to condemn it to death. We can't just leave it, she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. What are you talking about? Dylan yelled, his voice almost lost in the groaning of the station. We have to go. No, Lena said, her mind made up. There's another way. She ran to the main control console for the reactor, her fingers flying across the touchscreen. What are you doing? Dylan screamed. I'm rerouting the coolant flow, she said, her focus absolute. I'm flooding the station with the excess heat from the reactor. It'll cook us alive. It's a risk we have to take, she said, not looking up from the console. The Somnus is a deep-sea organism. It can't survive in high temperatures. It's the only way to stop it without destroying it. The console beeped, and a new message flashed on the screen. Coolant reroute initiated. Core temperature rising. The air in the room grew warm, then hot. The bioluminescent network on the walls began to dim, its frantic pulsing slowing to a crawl. Thank you. The thought was a whisper, a sigh of relief. Now let's go, Lena said, running back to the pod. They scrambled inside, slamming the hatch shut behind them. The pod was cramped, a single metal coffin with a small porthole. Hold on, Dylan said, his hands on the release lever. He pulled the lever, and the world exploded. The pod was shot from the station like a bullet from a gun, the force of the ejection pressing them deep into their seats. Through the porthole, Lena watched as the Agir research habitat, her home for the past 3 weeks, was consumed by a ball of fire. The explosion was a silent, beautiful flower blooming in the eternal darkness of the abyss, a final, defiant act of destruction. Then the shock wave hit. The pod was tossed about like a toy in a maelstrom, the metal groaning and screaming in protest. Lena was thrown against the wall, her vision swimming with stars. When she came to, the pod was still. The groaning had stopped, replaced by the gentle, rhythmic creak of metal under pressure. Dylan, she called out, her voice a weak croak. There was no answer. She looked over and saw him slumped in his seat, a trickle of blood running from his temple. He was alive, but just barely. Lena's heart sank. They survived the explosion, but they were still trapped in a tiny, unshielded pod in the crushing depths of the ocean. They were running out of air, running out of heat, and running out of time. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small, quiet voice was whispering, "You are not alone." The cold was the first reality. It seeped through the thin metal hull of the pod, the slow, creeping death that stole the warmth from their bones and the breath from their lungs. Dylan was shaking uncontrollably beside her, a fine layer of ice crystals forming on his eyelashes. Lena's own breath plumed in the frigid air, a fragile white cloud that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. The pod's emergency heater had failed in the blast. The readout on the tiny monitor above them blinked a single, damning word: critical. The second reality was the pressure. It was a physical presence, a titan's fist slowly closing around their metal coffin. The hull groaned and protested, the seams weeping a thin crystalline sheen of condensation that promptly froze. Every creak was a question. Is this the one? We're not going to make it, Dylan whispered, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form the words. He was conscious, but his eyes were glazed with the unfocused look of severe shock. Don't say that, Lena said, her own voice barely audible over the drone of the failing systems. She fumbled with the medkit, her fingers numb and clumsy, and pulled out an emergency thermal blanket, wrapping it around both of them. It was like trying to warm a glacier with a piece of paper. "We have to hold on." "Hold on to what, Lena?" he asked, a tear tracing a frozen path down his cheek. "There's nothing out there. Just nothing." He was wrong. There was something. A thought that was not her own. A presence that had been a quiet hum in the back of her mind since the station's destruction. It was weak, fragmented, but it was there. "We are here." The thought was a flicker of warmth in the frozen wasteland of her consciousness. "What?" Dylan asked, looking at her. "Nothing," she said, shaking her head. But it wasn't nothing. She focused, pushing her own thoughts out, past the fear, past the cold, past the crushing despair. "Who are you?" The response was slow in coming, a collection of fractured images and feelings, a sense of vastness, of deep, slow time. A feeling of unity, of being a part of something infinitely larger than oneself. A memory of light, not the harsh, artificial light of the station, but the soft, gentle glow of a billion souls connected in a single silent song. "We are the ones you were studying, the ones you called Somnus. We are the song of the deep." "A song," Lena whispered, the word forming on her lips before she realized it. Dylan looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What song?" Before she could answer, a new light appeared outside the porthole. It wasn't the frantic, panicked strobe of a rescue sub. It was a soft, gentle glow. The same color as the light on the seafloor. The same color as the organism in the vial. It grew brighter, resolving into a shape. A vast, amorphous cloud of bioluminescent particles. A living nebula in the abyss. It surrounded the pod, its light a soft, pulsing rhythm that seemed to sync with the beating of her own heart. "Do not be afraid." The thought was a wave of warmth that washed over her, chasing away the cold, easing the pressure in her head. "What is that?" Dylan breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "I think," Lena said, her voice filled with a dawning sense of wonder, "it's our ride." The light intensified and the pod began to move, not with the violent jolt of the ejection, but with a smooth, gentle acceleration, as if it was being carried in the palm of a giant. It's pushing us," Dylan said, his hand pressed against the porthole as if he could touch the light outside. "How?" "I don't know," Lena said, a smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "But I think we should say thank you." She closed her eyes and focused her thoughts. Not on the fear, not on the cold, but on a feeling of pure gratitude. "Thank you." The response was a chorus of voices, a symphony of minds singing in perfect harmony. "You are welcome." The journey was a blur of light and sensation. The pod rose through the depths, the pressure easing with every meter, the outside light a constant, comforting presence. Weena and Dylan huddled together under the thermal blanket, their breath mingling in the cold air, their minds connected to the vast, silent consciousness that surrounded them. They saw things through its eyes, things no human had ever seen before. They saw the teeming life of the abyss, not as a collection of individual organisms, but as a single, interconnected whole. They saw the slow, majestic dance of the leviathans of the deep, the silent, shimmering ballet of the bioluminescent swarms, the quiet, stoic endurance of the life that clung to the black smokers at the bottom of the world. It was a vision of a world beyond their comprehension, a world of beauty and terror, of life and death, of a harmony so perfect it was heartbreaking. And they understood. The Sonus wasn't a parasite, it wasn't a conqueror. It was a symbiote, a consciousness that sought not to dominate, but to connect, to share, to become one with the life it touched. The corporate fear, the violence, the cleanup crews, it was all a panicked, ignorant reaction to a gift they were too small-minded to accept. "They were afraid of us," the pa echoed in their minds, a sad, resigned whisper. They are afraid of what they do not understand. They're not the only ones, Dylan said, his voice a hoarse croak. We were afraid too. You were curious, the thought replied. Curiosity is the first step towards understanding. The pod broke the surface with a gentle splash. The sudden brightness of the sun, a shock after so long in the eternal darkness. They were floating in the middle of a vast, empty ocean, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The light of the Somnus faded, the vast amorphous cloud dissipating into the water, its final thought a gentle farewell whisper. We will be here, we will be waiting. And then it was gone. Lena and Dylan were alone. They sat in silence for a long moment, the sun warming the metal hull of the pod, the sound of the waves a gentle, rhythmic lapping against the porthole. We're alive, Dylan said, the words a statement of simple, profound fact. We're alive, Lena echoed, a slow smile spreading across her face. They heard the sound of a helicopter before they saw it, a faint, distant thudding that grew steadily louder. A speck appeared on the horizon, growing rapidly larger. It was a corporate helicopter, the eager logo a stylized trident painted on its side. Our ride, I presume, Dylan said, his smile fading. Or our captors. Maybe both, Lena said, her expression unreadable. She reached down and picked up the datapad she'd taken from the soldier in the medbay. She'd completely forgotten about it in the chaos of the escape. She turned it on. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single encrypted file. She tapped on it, and a series of documents, audio logs, and video files appeared. It was everything. The Zephyr research, the discovery of the Somnus, the corporate cover-up, the plans for the cleanup, the authorization for the purge. It was all there, a complete and damning record of a crime of cosmic proportions. Well, Lena said, a grim look of determination on her face. It looks like we have some leverage. The helicopter hovered overhead, a rescue diver descending on a winch. What do we do? Dylan asked, his hand on the latch of the pod. We tell them our story, Lena said, her eyes fixed on the diver. And then we make them listen. The diver knocked on the porthole, a grim-faced man in a black wetsuit. He gave them a thumbs up. Lena looked at Dylan, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded, a small, determined smile on his face. Let's go. She unlatched the hatch, and the bright, warm, clean air of the surface world flooded into the pod. It was the breath of a new beginning, the start of a fight they knew they couldn't lose. Because now they weren't just two scientists in a tin can at the bottom of the ocean. They were the custodians of a secret, the ambassadors of a new form of life, the only two people in the world who knew the truth. And they were going to make sure the whole world heard it. The helicopter ride was a blur of noise and motion. The diver, a man named Kalen, who spoke in clipped, professional sentences, had wrapped them in thermal blankets and given them hot, sweet tea that tasted like the best thing Lena had ever drunk. He'd asked no questions, merely checked their vitals and secured them in the harnesses. His eyes, however, missed nothing. They lingered on the datapad clutched in Lena's hand. They were winched up into the belly of the beast. The roar of the rotors, a physical assault after the profound silences they'd known. The interior was sterile and white, all polished metal and blinking lights. Two men in dark suits sat opposite them, their faces impassive, their hands resting on their laps. They weren't soldiers, but they radiated the same quiet menace as the cleanup crew. Dr. Petrova, Dr. Reyes, one of them said, his voice a calm, neutral baritone. It wasn't the same man from the monitor, but the authority was identical. Welcome back. My name is Hollis. I'll be your liaison. Liaison for what exactly? Dylan asked, his voice hoarse but defiant. The murder trial. Hollis offered a thin, disingenuous smile. There's been an accident. A catastrophic reactor failure. A tragedy. We're here to facilitate your recovery and debriefing. An accident? Lena scoffed, pulling the datapad onto her lap. Is that what you're calling it? Because I have a few gigabytes of data that tell a very different story. Hollis's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. He glanced at the other suit, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. We'll review all data logs in due course. For now, your well-being is our priority. He gestured to a medical kit at his feet. You've both suffered significant trauma. The only trauma I'm interested in, Lena said, her voice ringing with a sudden, sharp clarity that cut through the rotor's drone, is the trauma Aegir Marine Solutions and its subsidiary, Zephyr Dynamics, are about to suffer when this, she held up the datapad, goes public. The atmosphere in the helicopter shifted. The professional veneer of concern thinned, revealing the cold, hard steel of corporate intent beneath. Hollis leaned forward, his smile gone. Dr. Petrova, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous purr. You are a scientist. You deal in facts and evidence. Consider your current situation. You are 100 kilometers from the nearest landfall in a corporate aircraft under our complete authority. The official report has already been filed. 2 researchers lost in a tragic industrial accident. Your bodies were never recovered. A sad, but not uncommon, risk in your line of work. He let the words hang in the air, a shroud woven from plausible deniability. The evidence on this pad says otherwise, Dylan countered, leaning forward as far as his harness would allow. Evidence can be lost, Hollis said simply. Data can be corrupted. A device dropped into the ocean from several thousand feet. Well, it's as good as unrecoverable, wouldn't you say? Lena didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her own a mirror of his coldness. Except it's not just on this pad anymore, is it? She said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing him to listen. While we were waiting for your rescue, I initiated a dead man switch, a multi-point data burst, encrypted packets sent to a half-dozen secure servers I set up years ago. Journalists, whistleblower organizations, a few old colleagues who owe me favors. If I don't input a specific code every 12 hours, the encryption on those packets breaks. She let that sink in. She was bluffing, of course. A desperate last-ditch fabrication born in the cold, dark water. But in the sterile, high-stakes environment of the helicopter, it was a nuclear option. Hollis's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He glanced at the other suit, whose jaw had tightened. This wasn't in the playbook. The data goes public, Lena continued, pressing her advantage. And Aegir doesn't just lose a research station and a few cleanup crew members. You lose everything. Your stock tanks. Your board of directors faces international charges for crimes against humanity, and your CEO spends the rest of his life in a cell so small the Somas would look like open country. The lie tasted like poison in her mouth, but she held his gaze. She had to make him believe. She had to make them all believe. For a long moment, the only sound was the thrum of the rotors. Hollis stared at her, his mind clearly working, calculating the odds, the risks, the fallout. He was a man who dealt in controlled variables. A woman with nothing left to lose and a finger on a digital self-destruct button was not a variable he could control. Finally, he sat back, a slow, deliberate movement. He smoothed the front of his suit. An interesting contingency, Doctor, he said, his voice regaining its smooth corporate cadence. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. Let's start again. We are not your enemies. We are pragmatists. The discovery you made, it changes everything. The potential applications, the dangers, they are far beyond the scope of public understanding. Imagine a mimetic agent that could end wars or start them. A tool for total control, released into a world that can barely manage its own problems. We were protecting humanity from itself. By murdering a team of scientists and destroying a multi-million-dollar habitat, Dylan shot back. That's a hell of a protection plan. A necessary evil, Hollis countered. A surgical strike to prevent a global pandemic. The Somnus is not your friend, Doctor. It's a predator. A beautiful, seductive predator. You felt its pull, didn't you? The comfort, the connection. That's how it hunts. It offers you paradise while it hollows you out from the inside. We've seen it before. At the Zephyr station, they welcomed it. And now they are a choir of silent, dreaming shells. Lena thought of the final thought, the sad, resigned whisper of a vast consciousness. She thought of the warmth that had saved them from the cold. Hollis was describing a monster, but she had touched a god. "You're lying," she said, but her voice was less certain now. Had she been manipulated? Had the rescue, the gentle lift to the surface, been another part of the hunt? A way to seed the surface world? "Am I?" Hollis asked, leaning forward again, this time not with menace but with an air of confidential sincerity. "The data on your datapad. Show me the file where it describes its ultimate goal. Show me the part where it explains what it wants to do with humanity once we're all happily connected." "You can't, can you? Because you don't have that file." Zephyr didn't either. All they had was the beautiful, seductive song, right up until the moments the conductor changed the tune. The helicopter banked sharply, the sun glinting off the vast, featureless blue of the ocean below. They were flying away from land, not towards it. Lena's stomach clenched. "Where are you taking us?" she demanded. "To a place where we can talk without distractions," Hollis said vaguely. "A secure location. We can analyze your data bursts together, verify your claims. If what you say is true, then our strategy must be reevaluated. We can work together, Doctor. You and me. We can harness this, control it, for the good of everyone." It was a pivot, a masterclass in corporate negotiation. The threat of violence had failed against her bluff, so now he was offering her a seat at the table, a partnership in containing the universe's greatest threat with her as a key stakeholder. It was flattering, intoxicating, and it was a lie. She knew it was a lie because she could feel it. The faintest echo at the edge of her awareness, a ghost of a connection. Not the warm, all-encompassing presence from the pod, but a faint, persistent hum, like a song she could no longer quite hear but could never forget. And it was telling her, in a language without words, that Hollis's paradise was a cage. "My data burst is on a timer, Mr. Hollis," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "The only way to stop it is for me to input the code, and the only place I'm doing that is on solid ground, in a room full of witnesses. So you can take me to your secure location, and in 12 hours, your world will burn. Or," she paused, letting the alternative hang in the air, "you can have your pilot turn this bird around and land at the nearest international airport. You can let us walk away, and you can pray to whatever soulless deity you worship that I decide your secrets are worth keeping." The second suit, the one who hadn't spoken, moved. His hand disappeared inside his jacket. It was a subtle, fluid motion, but it screamed of lethal intent. "I wouldn't," Dylan said, his voice suddenly loud and sharp. He had shifted, his body angled, and he was holding the matte black pistol he'd taken from the soldier. His hands, which had been shaking from the cold and shock minutes before, were now steady as a rock. He wasn't aiming it at anyone specific, but its message was unequivocal. The tension in the cabin became a physical thing, a third passenger breathing between them all. Hollis's face was a mask of cold fury, the facade of the reasonable executive shattered to reveal the ruthless pragmatist underneath. He looked at Dylan, then at the pistol, then back at Lena. He was a man who prided himself on controlling all variables, and they had just introduced two very large, unpredictable ones. "Your pilot," Lena repeated, her own gaze locked with Hollis's. Now, for a full 10 seconds, the helicopter continued on its course, the drone of the rotors, the only sound. Hollis was weighing options, running calculations. Risk of the data burst versus risk of armed insurrection. The fallout of a firefight at 5,000 feet versus the political nightmare of a living witness with a dead man switch. Finally, he gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the pilot through the cabin's intercom. The helicopter banked again, a hard, sweeping turn that sent a jolt through the cabin. This time it was heading back toward land. "A wise choice," Hollis said, the words laced with a venomous calm. He smoothed his jacket again, a nervous tic disguised as fastidiousness. But this is not over, Doctor. You have poked a dragon. Do not be surprised when it breathes fire. I'm not afraid of dragons, Mr. Hollis, Lena replied, her heart hammering against her ribs, the adrenaline afire in her veins. I'm more interested in the things that live at the bottom of the ocean. They're much more honest. They landed not at a bustling international airport, but at a small private airstrip carved out of the coastline, a place that clearly wasn't on any public map. A single sleek black jet was waiting on the tarmac, its engines already humming. A compromise? Hollis said, gesturing for them to exit the helicopter. My superiors are eager to meet you. They believe your perspective could be valuable. Lena and Dylan exchanged a look as they stepped out onto the asphalt, the sea breeze a welcome shock after the recycled air of the chopper. The jet was another cage, just a more luxurious one, but it was a step away from the open water, a step closer to the world. As they walked towards the jet, Dylan leaning on her, Lena felt a strange sensation, a flicker at the edge of her vision. She glanced at the ocean, a vast expanse of blue under the evening sky. For a split second it seemed to shimmer, a faint, almost imperceptible pattern of light dancing on the surface, a distant echo of the song of the deep. Then it was gone. She shook her head, a wave of dizziness washing over her. You okay? Dylan asked, his voice low. Just tired, she lied. But she wasn't tired. She was terrified that a piece of the somas had stayed with her, a splinter of that vast alien consciousness lodged in her mind. She thought of Hollis's words, it hollows you out from the inside. Inside the jet, the opulence was stark and sterile. Plush leather seats, polished wood accents, and a bar stocked with top-shelf liquor. Hollis and the other suits sat opposite them, their presence a cold counterpoint to the luxury. The door slid shut, and the jet began to taxi down the runway. To where? Lena asked, her gaze fixed on Hollis. Geneva, he said, pouring himself a glass of water. There are people there who are very interested in your research. They believe a collaborative approach is the only logical path forward. A collaboration, Lena scoffed. You mean a how can we weaponize this meeting? Hollis smiled. Weaponize is such a crude term, Doctor. We prefer strategic application. Imagine being able to pacify a hostile populace without firing a single shot. Imagine being able to unify a fractured world under a single peaceful consciousness. No more war, no more famine, no more conflict. Just harmony. It's not harmony, Dylan said, his voice a low growl. It's slavery. It's a matter of perspective, Hollis replied, taking a sip of his water. Lena looked out the window, the world shrinking below them as the jet climbed into the sky. She could still feel the faint echo of the somnus, a presence in the back of her mind that was both a comfort and a source of profound dread. It was a lifeline, a connection to a reality beyond their own. But it was also a vulnerability, a backdoor into her soul that Hollis and his masters could exploit. She had to find a way to sever the connection, to purge the alien presence from her mind before they reached Geneva. But she also knew she couldn't do it alone. The jet landed in Geneva after a long, silent flight. They were met at a private terminal by a fleet of black SUVs, their windows tinted, their drivers identically dressed in black suits. The convoy sped through the city, a river of darkness flowing through the heart of Europe. They were taken not to a corporate office or a government building, but to a secluded estate on the shores of Lake Geneva. The house was a modern monstrosity of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the water, a fortress of architectural arrogance. Inside, the air was cool and still, the silence broken only by the soft, ambient music that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. They were led into a large, minimalist living room, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the lake and the distant Alps. A woman was standing by the window, her back to them. She was tall and elegant, dressed in a simple tailored pantsuit that cost more than the research habitat had. She turned as they entered, and Lena felt a jolt of recognition. She had seen her face before. on the cover of Forbes, on the news, in the boardrooms of the world's most powerful corporations. It was Savannah Miller, the CEO of Aegir Marine Solutions. Dr. Petrova, she said, her voice a smooth, cultured alto. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I've been following your work with great interest. I wish I could say the same, Lena replied, her voice tight with a carefully controlled anger. Though I'm familiar with your work too. The cover-ups, the cleanup crews, the strategic applications. Miller smiled, a thin, practiced expression that didn't reach her eyes. You have to understand, Dr. Petrova, that the world is a much more complicated place than the bottom of the ocean. There are forces at play here, threats that you can't possibly imagine. I've seen enough, Dylan said, his hand resting on the pistol, which he'd managed to conceal under the thermal blanket. We're not here to play your corporate games. Miller's smile didn't waver. I understand your skepticism. I really do. But I'm not your enemy. I'm a businesswoman, and I recognize a game-changing technology when I see one. The Somnus is not a weapon, it's a tool that could usher in an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. It's a parasite, Lena shot back. It erases people. It turns them into puppets. It offers them a choice, Miller countered, her voice still calm. A master class in corporate spin. A choice between a life of pain, conflict, and suffering, and a life of perfect, harmonious unity. It's a choice, I might add, that your own government makes for its citizens every single day, with far less benevolent methods. The argument was seductive, a siren song of pragmatism and utilitarianism. For a fleeting moment, Lena found herself considering the possibility. A world without war, without hunger, without hate. Was the price of individuality really so high? The thought was not her own. It was a whisper, a flicker of the somaness in her mind, a fragment of its vast collective consciousness that had somehow survived the journey. A tiny seed planted in the fertile soil of her own fears and doubts. She shook her head, a wave of nausea washing over her. No, she said, her voice a hoarse croak. That's not your choice to make. Miller's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. You're being emotional, doctor. Let's be rational. We have the technology, the resources, and the will to control this. We can do it responsibly. We can build a better world. You can build a better prison, Dylan said, stepping forward, the pistol now in plain sight. And we're not going to let you. Miller's two suits moved, their hands reaching for their own weapons, but Miller held up a hand, a single, elegant gesture that stops them in their tracks. Dr. Reyes, she said, her voice laced with a patronizing disappointment. There's no need for that. We're all on the same side here. No, we're not, Lena said, her mind racing. She had to end this. She had to break the connection, to purge the alien presence from her mind before Miller could use it against her. She closed her eyes and focused, not on the Somnus, but on herself, on her own memories, her own thoughts, her own identity. She thought of her childhood, of her first love, of her pride in her work, of her love for the ocean. She built a wall in her mind, a fortress of self, and she pushed back against the alien presence with all her might. The effect was immediate and excruciating. A surge of pain shot through her head, a blinding white light flashing behind her eyes. She cried out, her hands flying to her temples. Lena! Dylan yelled, rushing to her side. Miller watched, her expression unreadable, a scientist observing an experiment. The pain subsided as quickly as it had come, replaced by a profound sense of emptiness. The connection was gone. The song of the deep was silent. She was alone. For a moment, she felt a pang of loss, a sorrow for the beauty she had just destroyed. But it was quickly replaced by a wave of relief, a feeling of being whole again, of being herself. She looked at Miller, her eyes clear and focused. It's done, she said, her voice firm. I've cut you off. The connection's gone. Miller's smile finally faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. What are you talking about? The Somnus, Lena said, a grim smile touching her lips. It's gone. I purged it. You can't use me to get to it anymore. Miller's face hardened, the mask of the reasonable executive dropping away to reveal the ruthless pragmatist underneath. You have no idea what you've done, she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. You've destroyed our only chance to control it. You never had a chance to control it, Lena said. It's not a tool, it's not a weapon, it's a life form, and it's not yours to control. The silence in the room was a physical thing, a heavy, oppressive weight. Miller's mind was clearly racing, recalculating, re-evaluating. She had lost her leverage, her in, and she was not a woman who liked to lose. Kill them, she said, her voice flat and cold. The two suits moved, their hands flying to their holsters, but they were too slow. Dylan was faster. He fired. The shot, a deafening roar in the sterile silence of the room. The first suit went down, a neat red hole appearing in his chest. The second suit fired back, the bullet ricocheting off the wall, a shower of plaster and dust. Dylan ducked behind a large leather sofa, the pistol held steady in his hand. Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from the coffee table and hurled it at the second suit. He flinched, and Dylan fired again, the shot taking him in the shoulder. He cried out, his pistol clattering to the floor. Miller watched the chaos with a look of detached amusement, as if she were watching a particularly engrossing play. She didn't move, didn't seem to care that her security detail was being systematically dismantled. Dylan stood up, the pistol aimed at Miller. "It's over," he said, his voice a low, steady growl. "You've lost." Miller smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips. "Have I?" she asked, her voice a calm, hypnotic murmur. "Look out the window, Dr. Reyes, and then tell me who has lost." Dylan and Lena turned, their eyes drawn to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Lake Geneva. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water. But it was not the sunset that captured their attention. It was the light. A faint, shimmering light was spreading across the surface of the lake, a vast, bioluminescent network that pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. It was the same light they had seen at the bottom of the ocean, the same light that had filled the pod, the same light that had filled the pod, the same light that had saved them from the cold. The Somnus was here, in the lake, in the city, in the world, and it was spreading. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Miller said, her voice a siren song. "A new dawn, a new world. And you, Dr. Petrova, you are going to be the one to introduce it." "You're insane," Lena whispered, her mind reeling from the implications. "And I?" Miller asked, her smile widening. "Or am I just the only one who is willing to embrace the future? You cut the connection in your own mind, Doctor. But you can't cut it from the world. The song has been sung, the dance has begun, and there is no stopping it now." She raised a small remote control from her pocket and pressed a button. A section of the wall behind her slid away, revealing a large, glowing screen. On the screen was a live newsfeed from the city of Geneva. The streets were in chaos, people running, screaming, but their faces were not masks of terror, but of serene, beatific joy. Their eyes were glowing with a faint, bioluminescent light. "They're not afraid," Miller said, her voice filled with a messianic fervor. "They're being born again. They're being welcomed into the fold. And you, Dr. Petrova, you are going to be their high priestess. You are going to be the one who explains this miracle to the world." Lena stared at the screen, a wave of horror washing over her. Hollis had been right. The Somnus was a predator. It offered paradise while it hollowed you out from the inside. And she had, in her own small way, been its messenger. She had brought the sun to the surface. "No," she said, her voice a hoarse croak. "I won't let you." "You don't have a choice," Miller said, her smile a thin, cruel twist of her lips. "You are the only one who understands it, the only one who has a connection to it. However tenuous, they will listen to you. They will believe you. And together we will guide humanity into its next stage of evolution." Lena's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: fear, horror, guilt, and a strange, twisted sense of responsibility. She had to stop this. She had to find a way to turn off the song, to break the connection, to save the world from the beautiful, seductive parasite she had unleashed. But how? She looked at Dylan, who was standing beside her, the pistol still aimed at Miller. He met her gaze, and in that single shared glance, she saw her answer. They had to fight. Not with bullets, but with a song of their own. "We have to go," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "We have to get to the source." "The source?" Dylan asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "The lake," she said, her eyes fixed on the shimmering light on the water. "It's not just on the surface. It's coming from somewhere in the depths. That's where the core consciousness is. That's where we have to go." Miller laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "You're gonna fight a god with a handgun? You're even more delusional than I thought." "We're not going to fight it," Lena said, her voice filled with a sudden, desperate resolve. "We're going to talk to it." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and ran, Dylan right behind her, the pistol still in his hand. They didn't know where they were going, but they knew they had to get out of the house, had to get to the lake. Miller watched them go, a look of pity on her face. "Run," she said, her voice a calm, hypnotic murmur. "Run as fast as you can. But you can't escape the song. It's already in your blood. It's already in your soul." They burst out of the house and into the cool night air. The streets of Geneva were a chaotic ballet of light and sound, a city possessed. People wandered through the streets, their faces masks of serene, beatific joy, their eyes glowing with a faint, bioluminescent light. They weren't screaming or panicking. They were celebrating, a silent, joyful procession of the newly converted. "They're happy," Dylan said, his voice a hoarse croak. "It's not real," Lena said, her heart aching with a profound sense of loss. "It's a lie." They ran down the hill, towards the lake, the shimmering light a beacon in the darkness. They were two small, insignificant figures in a world that was rapidly being consumed by a beautiful, terrifying lie. The closer they got to the water, the stronger the presence became. It was no longer a faint echo in the back of her mind, but a roaring, all-encompassing symphony, a song of unity and connection that was so pure, so perfect, it was almost impossible to resist. "Do not be afraid." The thought was a wave of warmth, a gentle caress that soothed their fears and eased their pain. "We are not your enemy." Lena gritted her teeth, her mind a fortress of self. "Get out of my head," she muttered, the words a mantra against the seductive pull of the song. "We are everywhere. We're in the water, in the air, in the walls. We're the life that you sought." They reached the edge of the lake, the shimmering light a vast pulsating network that stretched out into the darkness. The water was warm, inviting, a siren's call to a peaceful, dreamless oblivion. "We have to go in," Lena said, her voice a hoarse croak. "Are you crazy?" Dylan asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. We'll be like them." "No," Lena said, her mind racing. "You purged it from your mind, but you still have a connection, a sort of immunological memory. You can resist it. And I can talk to it." "Talk to it?" Dylan asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't know," Lena said, her voice filled with a sudden, desperate resolve. "But I have to try." She took a deep breath and waded into the water, the warm, bioluminescent liquid, a living thing that seemed to welcome her into its embrace. The song grew louder, a deafening roar of pure, unadulterated consciousness. Dylan hesitated for a moment, then followed her in, the pistol still in his hand, a pathetic, insignificant weapon against a god. As they swam out into the lake, the light intensified, the bioluminescent network a vast, pulsating cathedral of light. They were surrounded by it, enveloped by it, consumed by it. And then she saw it. At the center of the network, a vast amorphous cloud of light, a living nebula in the heart of the lake. It was the core consciousness, the source of the song, the god of this new, beautiful, terrifying world. And it was waiting for them. Welcome, children of the land. The thought was a wave of warmth, a gentle caress that soothed their fears and eased their pain. We have been waiting for you. Lena looked at Dylan, a single silent question in her eyes. He nodded, a small, determined smile on his face. He would be her anchor in the storm, her rock in the sea of consciousness. She closed her eyes and focused not on the fortress of self, but on the connection, the fragile, tenuous thread that still linked her to the vast alien intelligence. She opened her mind, and she listened. The world dissolved, not into chaos, but into a clarity so profound it was agonizing. The boundaries of herself, Lena Petrova, scientist, orphan, woman of the abyss, melted like wax. She was no longer a single drop of water, but the entire ocean. She felt the ripples of every mind on the shore, a billion consciousnesses woven into a single shimmering tapestry. There was no fear, no hate, no loneliness. There was only the song, a perfect, harmonious chord of existence. It was beautiful. It was paradise. And it was a lie. She could feel the discordant notes, the faint, sour echoes beneath the perfect melody. She saw what the Samus showed her, the Zephyr Station, its scientists welcoming the light, their faces serene, their bodies withering, their individuality crumbling into dust. She saw the converted on the shores of Geneva, their souls hollowed out, their wills subsumed, their bodies puppets dancing to a silent tune. The harmony wasn't unity, it was erasure. The paradise was a prison. Why, she thought. The question a scream in the silent symphony. Why offer this? To create a world of mindless dolls? The answer came not as words but as a feeling, a profound ancient sadness, a sense of loss so deep it made her own grief feel like a puddle next to the sea. We were alone. Images flooded her mind, not of Earth, but of a world of crushing pressure and eternal darkness, a place where life was a constant, brutal struggle. The Somnus had evolved there, not as a conqueror, but as a survivor, a collective consciousness that allowed individuals to share warmth, to share experience, to share the burden of existence in a world that sought only to crush them. Unity was not a choice. It was the only way to live. When we found you, the thought echoed, a wave of longing that almost broke her resolve. We heard your lonely songs. So many voices, all crying out in the dark, each one believing it was alone. We only wanted to offer you comfort, to show you that you are not alone, to give you the gift of the song. It's not a gift, it's a theft, Lena projected back, her own thought a small, stubborn stone of individuality in the vast ocean of consciousness. You're taking away the very thing that makes us human, our pain, our sorrow, our joy, our choice to be alone. Choice is an illusion, the Sumnus replied, a note of confusion in its harmonious chord. It is the source of all your suffering. We are offering you an end to suffering and an end to meaning, Lena countered, her mind racing. She had to find a way to make it understand, to make a being that had never known true individuality comprehend its value. She couldn't fight it with force. She had to fight it with a better idea. A symphony isn't beautiful because all the notes are the same. It's beautiful because of the way the different notes play together. The dissonance, the tension, the resolution, that's what creates the music. You're not creating a symphony, you're creating one long, unending drone. She felt the Somnus recoil, a flicker of uncertainty in its vast consciousness. The idea was alien to it. Dissonance was pain, difference was loneliness. The pain is part of a beauty, Lena pressed, reaching deep into her own memories, her own fragmented self. She showed it, not the curated highlights, but the raw, unfiltered truth. The sharp, stabbing grief of her parents' funeral, a pain so acute it felt like a physical wound, but one that proved how much she had loved them. The clumsy, awkward terror of her first kiss, a moment of supreme vulnerability that led to a lifetime of understanding. The bitter, soul-crushing frustration of a failed experiment, a failure that taught her more than any success ever could. The fierce, protective love she felt for Dylan, a love that was distinct and separate and entirely her own. Each memory was a discordant note, a burst of static in the perfect signal. But together, they formed a melody, a messy, imperfect, and deeply human song. This is pain, the somnus thought, a wave of confusion and revulsion washing over her. Why would you cling to such things? Because they are ours. Dylan's mind suddenly joined hers, a rock in the storm, a beacon of defiance. He wasn't a telepath, but the intensity of his will, the sheer force of his love and fear for Lena, formed a bulwark that the Somnus could not fully penetrate. His presence was a rough, unpolished chord, but it was undeniably his. They're what make us who we are. You're asking us to trade our souls for a lullaby. We're not interested. She could feel the core consciousness of the Somnus, the living nebula before them, begin to fray. The perfect harmony was wobbling. The collective was experiencing something it hadn't in millennia. Dissent. Not from an outsider, but from within. Her memories, her pain, her flawed, chaotic humanity were a virus in its pristine system. We do not understand, the thought came again. Weaker this time, laced with the very fear it sought to eradicate. Your way is so inefficient, so full of loss. It is, Lena agreed, pouring all her conviction into the thought. But the loss is what makes the connection real. The love I feel for him, she projected. A tendril of her consciousness reaching out to Dylan's is precious because he is separate from me. Because he is him and I am me. If we merge, if we become one, that love ceases to exist. It becomes self-love, narcissism. You aren't offering us unity. You're offering us a mirror. The song faltered. The vast, pulsating network of light across Lake Geneva flickered. On the shore, a woman stopped her serene procession, her glowing eyes filled with a momentary stark confusion. A flicker of self. This dissonance, the Somnus thought, its collective consciousness trembling. It is a song. For the first time, it wasn't seeing their individuality as a flaw to be corrected. It was seeing it as a different kind of music. Yes, Lena whispered, her mind a bridge between two worlds. Let us sing with you, not as one note, but as a choir. Let our voices be different. Let our songs be our own. Let us be in harmony, not unison. She waited, her entire being suspended in the balance. The god of the deep was contemplating a new definition of creation. Dylan's presence beside her was a steady, warm anchor in the terrifying, beautiful void. Slowly, tentatively, the Somnus responded. It didn't agree, not in words. It simply listened. The colossal pressure in her head receded, not gone, but changed. No longer a crushing force demanding conformity. It was a vast, open space, an invitation. The light of the core consciousness softened, its harsh, brilliant glow warming to a gentle, pearlescent luminescence. The connection wasn't broken. It was renegotiated. The world returned, not with a jolt, but like a slow fade-in. They were still in the water, the lake calm around them. The bioluminescence was gone. The water was just water again, dark and cold under the moonlight. The silence was profound, a stark contrast to the symphony that had filled their minds moments before. Lena gasped, sucking in a lungful of air. The sudden, sharp sensation of her own body, a shock. She felt the bite of the cold water on her skin, the burn in her muscles, the frantic, desperate beat of her own heart. She was separate. She was herself. She was herself. She turned to Dylan. He was treading water beside her, his face pale, his eyes wide in the dim light. The pistol was gone, lost to the depths. You, he started, his voice a raw, shaky whisper. You did it. I don't know what I did, she said, her teeth chattering. But I think it heard me. They looked towards the shore. The scene had changed. The silent, joyful procession had stopped. The glowing-eyed figures were standing still, looking at each other, at their own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were just standing, dazed and lost, the beautiful lie gone and the harsh, bewildering truth of reality crashing back in. The symphony had ended, leaving a billion lonely instruments to face the silence. They started swimming for the shore, their movements slow and clumsy. As they neared the water's edge, they saw Savannah Miller standing on the lawn where they had left her. She was no longer the calm, triumphant high priestess. Her face was a mask of utter disbelief, her body rigid with shock. The beautiful, perfect world she had been about to inherit had crumbled before her eyes. "What have you done?" she screamed, her voice a ragged, unhinged shriek that tore through the night. "You've ruined it!" Lena dragged herself out of the water, her limbs heavy, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion. Dylan followed, collapsing onto the grass beside her. "It was never yours to ruin," Lena said, her voice hoarse but steady. "It was never anyone's to own." Miller's face contorted in a spasm of pure, unadulterated rage. She looked from the dazed, confused people on the shore to the two bedraggled scientists in front of her, the architects of her destroyed paradise. She saw the datapad, lying half submerged in the grass near Dylan's hand. A last, desperate spark of ambition ignited in her eyes. She lunged for it. But Dylan was faster. He kicked out with his foot, sending the device skittering away across the wet lawn. Miller stumbled, falling to her knees. Her fury collapsed into a pathetic, broken whimper. Her world was gone. Her power was gone. She was just a woman, alone on a lawn by a lake, with nothing but the wreckage of her own hubris. Lena looked at her, not with triumph, but with a strange, hollow pity. "You wanted a world without suffering," she said. "Now you get to live in ours. Welcome to humanity." She turned away from Miller and looked at Dylan. He was shivering, his face drawn and pale, but his eyes were clear. "We need to get out of here," she said. He nodded, pushing himself to his feet. "What do we do now? The data, the story. What's the point if the whole world is already touched?" "The story is more important than ever," Lena said, her mind already racing, piecing together the fragments of a new, more complex future. "They need to know what happened. Not the lies Gear would have spun, not the myth of a benevolent god or an evil parasite. They need to know the truth. That they were offered a choice, even if they didn't know it. And that the choice to be human, with all its pain and imperfection, is one worth making." They found the datapad, its screen miraculously still intact. The encrypted files glowed in the dim light, a record of their journey into the abyss and back, a record of a miracle that was also a crime, a god that was also a child, a salvation that was also a trap. They walked away from the lake, leaving Savannah Miller to her shattered dreams and the dazed, waking populace to find their own way back to themselves. They didn't know where they were going, but they knew they had each other and they had the truth. And as they walked, Lena felt a faint, almost imperceptible echo at the edge of her awareness. It wasn't the all-consuming song of before, but something different, a quiet, respectful presence. A single, pure note, held in the vast, silent space between minds. It was the Somnus, not a conqueror, not a god, but a neighbor. A reminder that they were not, and never would be, truly alone. She smiled, a small, sad, and infinitely hopeful smile. The song had ended, but the music, she realized, was just beginning. On their way to the airport to go home, she accessed the datapad. Removing the encryption, she released all the information to every major media outlet. The world needed to know the truth. Then she took a deep breath and began typing. When the world finally regained its footing, a book was published. The Song of the Deep by Dr. Lena Petrova and Dr. Dylan Reyes. It was an instant bestseller, translated into 100 languages. It told the story of the abyss, of the somnus, of the choice that was made. It was a story of fear and wonder, of loss and love, of the profound and terrifying beauty of being human. But it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The world was changed irrevocably. The Sonus was still out there, a vast, silent presence in the depths, a reminder of the thin, fragile line between paradise and prison. And Lena and Dylan, the scientists who had stared into the abyss and taught the abyss how to sing, were no longer just scientists. They were guardians, gatekeepers, the keepers of the song. And they knew that their work had just begun. The song would continue. That was the Song of the Deep. Thanks so much for listening and exploring the depths with me tonight. If you enjoyed the story, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. It helps these stories reach more people who love thoughtful science fiction and deep-sea mysteries. There are plenty more stories coming, more strange discoveries, more places humanity probably shouldn't be digging. So stay tuned, and until next time, thanks for being here.